Good evening, wherever you are tonight. I hope you're safe. I'd like to tell you a story. It's a quiet one about a man, a bench, and a lake that remembers more than people think. So lie back, let the day melt away. This is the bench by the lake. There is a lake just outside the edge of a quiet town. Not many people visit it now. The path that leads to it is lined with old trees, bending like they're whispering to each other. The grass has grown tall, and in the stillness, it sways gently, like the earth is breathing slow and deep. Some say time moves differently there, not faster, not slower, just quieter. And by that lake, there is a bench, wooden, weathered, carved with initials no one remembers anymore. It sits slightly off balance, leaning just enough to feel like it might tip, but it never does. It's been there longer than most things in town. Some say the bench came first, and the lake filled in after. Of course, that's not true, but it's the kind of story people tell when they stop needing facts and just want a little magic in their memory. Every morning, just as the fog lifted and the sun reached through the trees, like it had just woken up too, an old man came walking. No one knew his name. He wore the same coat every day, grey with patches at the elbows. He walked with a cane, though he barely leaned on it. And when he sat on the bench, he didn't move for hours. Not to check a phone, not to sip coffee. Just sat, hands folded, eyes on the water. Some mornings he closed his eyes. Other days, he'd hum a tune, soft and slow, the kind you didn't recognize but somehow felt you knew. People began to notice. Runners passing by would lower their music. A boy walking his dog would stop and glance like he was watching a scene in a movie. No one ever bothered him, not because they were afraid, but because the bench and the man on it felt like part of something you shouldn't interrupt. He never brought anything with him. No book, no bag, just himself and silence. One morning, just as the air smelled like new leaves, a young woman sat on the bench after he left. She looked out over the lake, expecting nothing. And there, tucked under the wooden armrest, was a folded piece of paper. Old, but not forgotten. She hesitated, then opened it. It said, "If you're reading this, maybe you've sat here long enough to hear what I heard. The lake doesn't talk, but it remembers. Just listen." The girl didn't know what to make of it, but she came back the next day, and the next. The man still came each morning. She never spoke to him, but she always came after. The bench had become something else. The next morning, the girl came earlier. She arrived just after dawn, when the air still held the hush of the night, and the trees hadn't stretched yet. The light was pale, barely touching the tops of the reeds by the lake. She walked the path slower this time. The gravel under her shoes made almost no sound, and every now and then she looked up, half expecting to see the old man already there. But the bench was empty. She stood for a moment, not sad, not disappointed, just noticing. And then, like he had always been there, the old man came walking through the mist. Same coat, same quiet steps. He didn't look surprised to see her, but he didn't smile either. Just gave a small nod, the kind that means, "I see you, that's enough." She stood aside as he sat, and for a moment she almost spoke, almost asked his name, almost said, "Thank you for the letter." But she didn't, because some silences feel fuller than words, and she didn't want to break this one. So she sat on the ground, near a tree, far enough to give him space, close enough to feel the stillness with him. The lake, that morning, was glass, the kind of still water that reflects not just light, but memory. And the girl watched it like it might show her something. Something more than just trees and sky. The old man, as always, stayed for an hour, maybe two. He didn't speak, didn't turn, but once she thought she heard him hum. Not the same tune as before. This one was softer, almost like a lullaby forgotten. And when he left, she stayed behind. She waited a long time before moving. When she finally stood, she looked at the bench. There was no note this time. But something felt different, like the bench had shifted, like it had breathed. She came again the next day, and the next. Sometimes the man was already there. Sometimes he came later. Sometimes, when the clouds hung low and the air smelled like wet stone, he didn't come at all. But the girl did. She came with her notebook. She didn't write much, just words that floated through her mind when the wind passed over the lake. The stillness is louder than the city. Some silences feel warm. There is peace in being unimportant. The town began to forget her face. She stopped going to the places she used to, stopped checking her phone every 5 minutes, stopped trying to outrun her own thoughts. Instead, she gave them room to sit beside her, to breathe, to just be. And somehow they stopped shouting. The bench, now, held more than wood and age. It held time. Not the kind you count, the kind you feel. The girl started to bring a thermos of tea. Not because it was cold, but because holding something warm felt right. And one morning, just before the sun broke the mist, she left a note under the bench. Not for him, but for whoever might sit next. It said, "If you're here, maybe you need this space too. It doesn't ask anything of you. It just listens." Days passed like water through fingers. She didn't count them anymore. The girl's visits became rhythm, not routine. She didn't have to remind herself to go. She just went, like the way trees lean toward the sun without thinking, like breathing when you're not afraid. The bench never changed, not in any way you could point to, but it felt different. The wood seemed warmer, the air around it gentler, like the lake had accepted her too. She never sat on the bench when the man was there. She always sat nearby, under the same tree, back against the bark, notebook in her lap, sometimes open, sometimes closed. Sometimes she wrote a single word: stillness. Other days she just watched the wind move through the tall grass like it was telling stories only the earth could hear. One morning she came earlier than usual. The stars were still fading. The world hadn't quite turned blue yet, and he was already there. She paused. This time he looked at her. Not just a glance, a real look, like he'd known she'd come earlier that day, and he nodded again, slightly deeper than before. She sat in her usual spot. Neither of them spoke, but something had changed. The silence between them felt not full, not empty, balanced, like a bridge made of air and understanding. After he left, she sat on the bench. Not long, just enough to feel what he had felt. The wood didn't creak, the lake didn't stir. Even the birds kept their distance, like they knew something quiet was happening. She didn't look for a note this time. She didn't need one. But as she stood to leave, a soft breeze came across the water, and she thought, or maybe only imagined, that it said, "You're becoming part of this too." That evening, back in her small apartment, she looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were softer. Not because she was tired, but because she wasn't fighting herself anymore. She had let silence in, and silence in turn had let her breathe. The next few days were the same, but not quite. She noticed things she never had before. How the trees by the lake creaked slightly in the wind, like old knees bending with kindness. How the shadows on the water looked like they were dancing slowly together. And how the bench always seemed to know. One afternoon, she brought an old book, not to read it, just to hold it. It had belonged to her mother. The pages smelled like thyme. She placed it beside her on the ground, didn't open it, didn't explain it, just brought it with her, and the bench didn't ask why. It simply remained, as it always had, strong, patient, and willing to hold whatever someone needed to leave behind. It was a Thursday when it rained. Not the kind of rain that falls in sheets. This one was gentle, like the sky was just trying to soothe the earth. The path to the lake was wet, the gravel darker, softer underfoot. The leaves hung low with water, and the air smelled like wet stone and memory. She brought an umbrella, but didn't open it. She liked how the rain touched her face, like it was reminding her that she was here, and real. When she arrived, the bench was empty, and yet it didn't feel alone. She sat beneath her usual tree, leaning into the bark, feeling the dampness seep into her jeans. For a long time she said nothing, did nothing, just listened. Raindrops tapping leaves, water touching water. The breath of the lake, slow and undisturbed. When the man finally came, he didn't walk the path. He came from the other side, through the tall reeds, his coat darker from the rain. He carried something, a thermos. It was the first time she'd seen him bring anything. He sat as usual, but this time he poured a small cup, held it in both hands, and looked across the lake like he was remembering something long gone. She watched him sip. It wasn't just tea. It was a ritual, a moment made sacred not by its ingredients, but by its presence. She thought about approaching him, just to ask, is it always this quiet? Or, why here? But instead she closed her eyes and let the sound of the rain tell her what she needed to know. And when she opened them, he was already gone. That evening she opened her mother's book. It wasn't a storybook. It was a journal. Blank pages, except for a few. One entry read, "Today I sat with silence. It didn't ask me to be strong. It just let me be." She didn't cry. She didn't even smile. She just held the book to her chest and let the rain, still whispering outside, keep her company. The next day she came even earlier, before the sun had even considered rising. The path was still wet, but the rain had passed, leaving everything with a quiet, dewy kind of freshness. The bench was there, of course, always waiting, always willing. This time she sat on it, and for the first time she leaned back. The wood was cool, solid. She closed her eyes, and for a moment she imagined what the bench had heard over the years. Laughter, goodbyes, secrets shared in whispers, and silence that said more than words ever could. When she opened her eyes, there was a folded napkin beside her, a note scribbled in a steady, old-fashioned hand. "It's chamomile. Helps with breathing. Tomorrow I'll bring two." She smiled, soft and small, like a bloom just breaking through the surface of still soil. The next morning she brought 2 cups, not matching. One was ceramic, with a faded painting of a mountain. The other, a plain metal camping mug with a tiny dent near the rim. She placed them gently on the bench, and then she waited. Not long after, he appeared. No surprise in his eyes, no change in expression, just a nod. slightly deeper than usual. He sat beside her. They didn't speak. She poured the tea. Chamomile, just like he had said. Still warm, still soft. She handed him the ceramic one. He accepted it with both hands. They sipped in silence, and it was the kind of silence that felt like music. Not because of sound, but because of rhythm. They breathed in time. The tea steamed upward like a gentle thread connecting them, and the lake watched. Birds moved across the water. Ducks, maybe. She wasn't sure. The trees creaked softly in the wind. The bench didn't move. And time didn't pass. It just hovered, like a cloud not sure where to rain. After the tea, they sat a while longer. No words, no exchange. But when he stood, he looked at her. Not a glance this time. A moment. He said softly, "Thank you." Then he walked away, his cane tapping gently, like punctuation on the end of a quiet poem. She didn't leave immediately. She leaned back, looked at the sky, now opening with soft blue, and smiled. There was no reason to rush, nothing to check, no one to reply to. The lake had become her calendar, the bench, her home base. The man, a quiet reminder that connection didn't always need language. That evening, she sat with her notebook. Pages now held short phrases. Thoughts, not organized, not planned. Just little pieces of being. Tea is a way of saying I see you. Silence is a kind of touch. The world is loud, but this bench listens. Later that week, she brought an extra scarf. It was old, knitted, the kind that still smelled faintly of lavender. She folded it and set it beside him on the bench. He looked at it, looked at her, then draped it across his lap. Nothing was said, but the gesture settled between them like warmth. That day, before he left, he reached into his coat pocket and handed her a small stone. Smooth, flat, grey with a streak of white like a lightning bolt frozen in silence. He didn't explain, didn't need to. She took it, nodded, and held it like it meant something, because somehow it did. The stone stayed with her. She kept it in her coat pocket, and when she wasn't wearing the coat, it rested on her nightstand beside a half-read book and a small dish that held nothing but lavender stems. Every time her fingers brushed it, she remembered how he had placed it in her palm, with no explanation, just weight and meaning. She never asked what it meant. Some things grow heavier when you name them. That morning, she came early again. The lake was still. The fog hadn't yet lifted. When she reached the bench, he was already there. But this time, he held something in his hands. A book, leather-bound, edges worn. He looked at her, nodded, and gently set the book down between them. She looked at it, didn't reach for it, didn't speak. He opened it slowly. The pages didn't rustle. They sighed. Inside were photos, black and white, faded but alive. A boy, a woman, a field, a wooden house, a bench. Not this one, but somehow the same. He didn't explain, just turned the pages slowly, like he hadn't done it in years. She sat with him, still, present, and when he closed the book, he placed one photo on top. The edges curled, the image faint, but she saw him, not old, younger, smiling beside someone with eyes like hers. He tapped the photo lightly and said, "She used to sit with me here, before the lake changed." Then he placed the photo back inside the book and didn't say another word. She didn't ask who the woman was, didn't ask what changed. Instead, she looked out over the lake and saw it differently, not just as water, but as witness, a keeper of moments, a mirror of things long past. And for the first time, she felt the quiet pull of time, not as loss, but as layering. When he left the book. Didn't say she could keep it, didn't say she couldn't. She picked it up, held it to her chest, and breathed. The pages were warm. That night, she sat by a window. Outside, the trees whispered in the dark. She opened the book again, not to study, not to pry, just to be with it. She flipped to the photo, the woman beside him, eyes soft, posture proud, the way people sit when they know where they belong. And for a moment, she imagined what it might have felt like to love someone that quietly and that deeply. She closed the book, not to put it away, but to hold the moment still, just a little longer. She hadn't meant to stay this long, not in the town, not by the lake, not in the quiet. She came here for a weekend, a break, a breath, a pause after the unravelling. There was a time, not long ago, when she had no silence, only noise, voices that expected, schedules that pressed, a life so full it left no room to feel. She was always running, from deadlines, from disappointments, from herself. Until one day she didn't run. She just stopped and kept driving. The lake wasn't a destination. It was a surrender. She had planned to go back, resume, reassemble, recover. But then she found the bench. Or maybe the bench found her, sitting there, days blurred into moments, and moments turned into a rhythm her heart finally understood. No pressure, no demands, just presence. And in that stillness, she started to hear things again. The way her breath slowed when the wind passed through the leaves. The way her shoulders dropped when birds sang near the reeds. The way her chest no longer tightened when she thought of yesterday. She hadn't told anyone where she was. Not because she wanted to disappear, but because she didn't want to explain. How do you explain peace when you've only known performance? How do you tell someone, I don't want to fix anything, I just want to feel nothing for a while? She didn't know, so she said nothing, and the lake didn't ask. One morning, she arrived at the bench before he did. She sat in her usual place, waited, but the waiting didn't feel like absence. It felt like holding a space. She watched the light slowly open across the water, thought of her mother's book, the stone in her pocket, the scarf she gave him, and she realised she hadn't checked her phone in 3 days. It sat in her bag, turned off, silent, just like her, learning to exist without buzz, without blinking screens, without someone needing something. The man came, slower today, but steadier than ever. He sat, nodded. They shared tea again. No words. She brought a small biscuit wrapped in cloth. He broke it in half, gave her back the bigger piece. They smiled. That was enough. And when he left, she looked at the bench, not as a stranger, not as a guest, but as someone who had been invited, accepted, anchored. That night, she wrote in her notebook. For the first time, it wasn't fragments. It was a letter. Not to him, not to anyone. To herself. I'm proud of you for sitting still, for letting silence in, for becoming softer, even after everything. The seasons didn't change all at once. They whispered their arrival. A breeze a little cooler. Leaves tinged with amber, not green. The lake no longer glass, but velvet. She didn't notice it at first, only that the birds sang at different times. The light came in at a new angle, and the old man, he sat a little longer each day. He didn't seem weaker, just slower, like his body was catching up with the stillness he had carried for so long. They still met, still shared tea, still let silence do the speaking. But there was something in the way he looked across the lake now. Not searching, not remembering. Something softer, like saying goodbye without words. That morning, he brought something else. A small box. Wooden. Smooth. Carved with a pattern that looked like waves. He didn't hand it to her, just placed it on the bench between them. She didn't ask. He didn't explain. It stayed there as they drank. The mist curled around the trees, and when he stood, he nodded, like always. But this time, he touched her shoulder, lightly, just enough for her to feel the warmth of his fingers. And then he walked away. She sat still long after he disappeared down the path. The box remained beside her. She didn't open it, not yet. Instead, she placed it in her lap, wrapped it gently in the scarf she'd once given him, and held it, like it had breath. That night, she placed the box on a table, didn't unwrap it, didn't look inside, just let it be. Some gifts are meant to arrive slowly, even after they've been given. The next morning she came early. The lake was quiet. The bench, waiting. But the man did not come. She sat, waited, sipped her tea alone, and though the cup was warm, her chest felt hollow. Not with sadness, not with fear, but with space. The kind of space someone leaves behind when they've given you something they can't take back. She looked at the bench, ran her hand over the wood, felt the grooves, initials, scars, stories, and whispered, "Thank you." Not to the man, not to the bench, to the time, to the silence, to everything she didn't have the words for. When she got home, she finally opened the box. Inside was a stone, almost identical to the one he gave her before, but this one had words carved into it. Faint, careful, be still, and become. She closed the box, not to hide it, but to let it rest, like him. The next morning, she didn't rush. She woke slowly, breathed deep, listened to the quiet around her, and realized it no longer felt unfamiliar. The silence didn't press against her anymore. It rested beside her, like a friend who didn't need to speak. She walked to the lake. The trees greeted her with rustling leaves, the gravel path crunching soft beneath her steps. The bench was there, of course, always there, always steady. But today, she didn't sit right away. She stood beside it, ran her fingers across the backrest, like one might do to an old piano before playing the first note. She noticed the imprint on the wood, not the carved initials. She'd seen those. But something newer. Faint, shallow, but familiar. A tiny symbol, the same wave pattern carved on the box he had left her. She smiled. She sat, alone, but not. Poured herself tea. No second cup, no scarf, no need. She took out her notebook, opened to a blank page, and began to write. Not to capture the moment, but to thank it. You gave me stillness. You gave me permission to not fix anything. You gave me silence without loneliness. She paused, looked up. The lake shimmered under the morning sun. Birds skimmed the surface. A breeze carried the scent of earth and of beginnings. She wrote again. I think it's time. Not to leave the bench, not to say goodbye, but to carry it with her, somewhere new. That afternoon, she packed lightly. No rush, no lists, no guilt. She folded the scarf, placed the carved stone in her coat pocket, wrapped the wooden box with care and slid it into her bag. She didn't tell anyone where she was going, just like before. But this time she wasn't running. She was walking, forward. She took one last path around the lake, slowly, paused beside the tree where she used to sit, touched the bark, thanked it too. She left a note, folded neatly, slipped beneath a small rock on the bench. Not for him, not even for herself, for whoever came next. This place listens. Let it. And then, with the lake behind her, she stepped onto the road. No destination, only direction. She didn't feel full. She didn't feel empty. She felt clear. Time passed. The bench remained. Seasons shifted. From the golds of fall to the hush of snow, then to the green bloom of spring, and back again. The lake changed with it. Not dramatically, but gently, like breath. People came and went. Some stopped at the bench. Some didn't. A boy once sat and carved a shape into the wood. A small heart, uneven but honest. A woman once sat there and cried. Not loudly, not for long, just enough to leave a tear that the bench quietly held. One morning, an older couple passed by. The woman paused, smiled at the bench, and said softly, "Still here." The man didn't answer. He just took her hand, and they walked on. The bench didn't remember names. It remembered presence. The warmth of someone pausing. The weight of someone letting go. The breath of someone finally exhaling. And then one day, a girl arrived. Not the same girl, but a girl. Young, quiet, curious. She didn't sit right away. She walked the edge of the lake, touched the reeds, watched the light ripple across the water. And then she found the note, tucked beneath a smooth grey rock. Old now, edges curled, ink slightly faded, but readable. "This place listens. Let it." She smiled, softly, like a secret had just been whispered only to her. She sat on the bench, closed her eyes, and listened. To the trees, to the wind, to the quiet weight of time around her. She didn't know who had left the note, didn't know how long it had waited, but she knew what it meant. And in that moment, so did the bench. Somewhere far away, in a small apartment, a woman unpacked a wooden box, placed a stone on her desk, sat by the window with tea in her hands. She looked out, not at a lake, not at trees, but she still heard the quiet, still felt the bench beneath her, even though it wasn't there, still carried the man's nod, the tea, the silence. Because the bench was never just a place, it was a presence, a pause, a permission, and that never really leaves you.